Racist airline kicks out black passenger. They freeze when he says he owns the airline. Darius Martin never expected a routine flight to turn into the most humiliating and shocking day of his life. One minute, he was waiting in line at an airport terminal, excited to celebrate his mother's birthday across the country. The next, uniformed staff of a well-known airline were demanding he step aside, spewing thinly veiled insults about his appearance and threatening to remove him from the flight. What they didn't realize, what no one in that airport could have imagined, was that Darius Martin was no ordinary passenger. When he finally revealed the truth he'd been hiding, the entire airline would be forced to kneel before him in disbelief. Darius Martin was used to being underestimated. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood in Atlanta, he learned early on how prejudice could lurk in the corners of everyday life. Teachers would praise him for being articulate, as if expecting something less. Potential landlords would look him up and down, finding subtle reasons to deny him a lease. Friends from outside his community would express surprise that he'd graduated from an Ivy League university on a full scholarship. Even in his early years, he understood that expectations for someone who looked like him, with his unassuming manner and quiet confidence, rarely aligned with what he was truly capable of achieving. He discovered an aptitude for business in his early 20s, launching a tech startup with a friend from MIT. The company specialized in creating cutting-edge software solutions for the aerospace industry. Fueled by his knack for innovation and an unwavering resolve, Darius saw his small enterprise blossom into a multi-million-dollar venture within just a few years. He diversified his investments, purchasing stakes in multiple companies, some tech, some hospitality, and, most recently, a struggling regional airline that needed a savior. He had a personal fascination with aviation and recognized an opportunity in the failing brand. In a matter of months, he acquired controlling shares. The airline, which had started decades ago as a small charter service, expanded too quickly under incompetent leadership. Darius saw potential in restoring its reputation by emphasizing passenger comfort, fair pricing, and top-tier customer service. The deal went through quietly. No public announcements trumpeted the new majority shareholder. He wanted to see the company's operations firsthand, unclouded by corporate red carpets or boardroom formality. If his presence remained anonymous, he might glean the unvarnished truth about how staff and executives treated customers, how effectively day-to-day operations ran, and whether the airline's core values aligned with his own. So, on one balmy spring morning, Darius found himself in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, heading to Gate B56, with a single carry-on bag slung over his shoulder. His plan was simple: take a routine flight to New York, gather with his family for his mother's birthday, and then discreetly evaluate the airline's service. He'd done it before, traveling incognito among paying passengers. Most times, the staff were courteous, though occasionally a bit frazzled. But so far, nothing particularly egregious had caught his eye. This day, however, would prove catastrophically different. The trouble began at check-in. Darius approached the self-service kiosk, scanning his e-ticket. A glitch in the system wouldn't let him proceed. Slightly annoyed, he strolled over to the main desk, manned by a middle-aged customer service agent. Her name tag read Leslie Johnson. She took one look at him, his casual jeans, a fitted polo, fresh sneakers, and gave a tight, perfunctory smile. "I need to confirm your reservation," Leslie said in a clipped tone, tapping briskly at the keyboard. "Name? Darius Martin." She typed again, eyebrows drawing together. "Well, the system says there's a problem with your payment. You'll need to wait over there until we can sort it out." Darius frowned. He'd purchased this ticket with his corporate card, the same one used for countless flights. He politely explained the situation, offering to show her the confirmation email on his phone. She glanced at the screen just long enough to notice his name, then waved him off. "System's the system," she said shortly. "Move to the side. We have other passengers to check in." Heads turned among those in line. A few shot him sympathetic looks. Others seemed curious about the sudden tension. Darius forced a calm smile. "I understand. I'd appreciate if you could try again, though. There might be a glitch. I flew last week and didn't have any issues." Leslie sighed, typed some more, then exhaled sharply. "Your ticket is flagged. I don't know the details, but you can't check in at this time. I'll have to call a supervisor." A swirl of confusion coiled in his stomach. He'd never heard of a flagged ticket. "All right, no problem," he said, stepping aside to give the next person room. "I'll wait." 5 minutes became 10, then 15, as the line dwindled. Eventually, Leslie fetched a supervisor, Paul Reynolds, a tall, dour man whose posture radiated impatience. He approached Darius, looked him up and down, and demanded his ID. Scanning the driver's license, Paul muttered something under his breath before finally punching a few overrides into the computer system. "Fine," he said. "It's cleared now. Might have been a random glitch. You'll need to hurry to the gate. The flight board's in 30 minutes. Without an apology or even a polite "have a good day," Paul turned away. Darius took a deep breath, reminding himself of the bigger picture. He was here to see how employees treated customers, and clearly improvements were needed. He grabbed his ticket and headed for security, feeling a mix of annoyance and resolution. If they treated a standard passenger like this, how often might it happen? After navigating the usual lines at the TSA checkpoint, Darius approached Gate 56. A half-dozen travelers lounged in nearby seats, while a gate agent typed furiously at her computer. An overhead sign announced, "Flight 617 to New York on time." He found a seat in a quiet corner and pulled out a business magazine, flipping through pages he'd already read. His focus was on the staff, watching how they handled the gate environment. He overheard the agent, a man named Mark Wallace, telling another passenger there might be a delay with seat assignments. Darius's brow furrowed. Seat assignments should have been settled by now. Perhaps the flight was overbooked. As the boarding announcement finally crackled over the speaker, passengers rose to line up in the typical zones. Darius had a seat in business class. He approached in the priority lane, scanning his ticket on the small device at the counter. The machine beeped, the screen turning red. Mark's expression soured. "It's not scanning," Mark said flatly. "Let me see your boarding pass." Darius handed it over, frustration building in his chest. Mark tapped at his computer, then frowned deeply. "Sir, I'm seeing an issue with your ticket. Says it's not valid for business class. You'll have to move to economy or leave the line." Confusion flared in Darius. "Excuse me? I purchased a business class seat. My e-receipt shows that." Mark's eyes glinted with a subtle, sharp hostility. "Look, if you can't afford the upgrade, you shouldn't try to cheat the system," he snapped. "This seat is for paying business class passengers." A hush fell over the travelers in line. Some turned away, pretending not to hear. Others stared openly, scandalized by Mark's tone. Darius felt heat rising in his cheeks. He was no stranger to passive-aggressive remarks about money and class. But the insinuation here was more insidious. A gate agent effectively calling him a liar and a cheat because of preconceived notions about how someone like him could or could not afford business class. He drew in a breath, forcing calm. "There's clearly a mistake," he said quietly. "Could you check the payment details?" "My seat should be..." Mark cut him off, raising his voice. "I don't need to see your payment details. If you can't produce valid proof right now, you're not boarding in business. Step aside." Darius stared at him, a swirl of anger and disbelief pounding in his ears. "I have the same corporate card that I used to purchase this seat," he offered, rummaging in his wallet. "I can show you," Mark scowled. "I said step aside. We've got a flight to board. If you won't cooperate, we'll remove you from the flight entirely." At that moment, a young mother holding her toddler stepped out of line. "Hey," she said softly to Mark, "I think you're being unfair. He said he can show you proof, MAAM. Stay out of this," Mark barked, slanting a glare at her. "You want to get on this plane, don't you?" She shrank back, eyes wide, turning to Darius with a helpless look. Darius gave her a tight nod, urging her not to jeopardize her own travel. He felt a tremor in his limbs, the old familiar surge of righteous indignation that used to fill him when teachers or neighbors acted like he didn't belong in their spaces. He gently placed his corporate card and phone on the counter. "Scan the card, check the records. You'll see I purchased a business class ticket." Mark's jaw tightened, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He snatched the card, typed numbers into the computer. Another beep. His eyes widened slightly at whatever the system displayed. Without explaining, he shoved the card back, lowering his voice so others wouldn't hear. "Well, it shows a payment method is on file, but somehow the seat assignment wasn't recognized. Might be an old glitch. That's what I tried to tell you," Darius said, voice taut with suppressed anger. Mark, however, wasn't willing to accept any blame. "We're fully booked in business. The only seat I have open is in economy. Either take it or you're not flying today." Stunned silence consumed the gate area. Darius could almost taste the tension in the air. This was more than a mere glitch. Mark's tone and hostility revealed a deeper prejudice. He simply didn't want Darius in business class. Perhaps Mark believed it was reserved for a certain type of passenger. Darius considered revealing his identity right then, but something held him back. He wanted to see just how far this would go. Would the airline staff correct the wrongdoing, or would their bigotry continue to escalate? Feeling trapped, and with the flight leaving soon, Darius reluctantly accepted the economy seat. "All right," he said, forcing civility, "but trust me, I'll be filing a complaint." Mark offered a sneer. "Do what you want. Now step out of the way." An older white man behind them shook his head, muttering under his breath, "This is ridiculous." As Darius walked toward the economy boarding line. It was indeed ridiculous, but the worst was yet to come. Once on board, Darius found himself sandwiched in a middle seat near the back of the Boeing 737. He grimaced. He didn't mind flying economy for short flights, if that was his choice, but forcibly downgrading him, that was something else entirely. His seatmates, a young woman in a sweatshirt and an elderly man with a cane, each nodded politely in greeting. Moments later, Mark himself came barreling down the aisle, followed by another flight attendant, a stern-looking woman named Brenda Saunders. Darius tensed, not sure what was going on. They stopped at his row. Brenda looked him over, her lips pursed. "Sir," she began, "there's a problem with your carry-on." "It's too large to fit in the overhead bin." Darius frowned. He'd traveled with that same bag countless times, never once had issues. "It fits fine," he said evenly. "I placed it in the overhead without difficulty." "It doesn't look standard," she insisted, making a show of trying to shove the bag further, though it was already fully inside the bin. "We'll need to check it, or you'll have to deplane." People around them stared, some leaning out of their seats to watch the confrontation. The overhead bin was clearly closed. The bag was not protruding, but Brenda's tone suggested she was determined to find any pretext to pick a fight with him. Another flight attendant, a young man named Carlos, who had been helping other passengers stow their luggage, approached. He opened the bin to inspect the bag. "This fits perfectly, Brenda," he said, confusion lacing his voice. "It's under the maximum dimension. What's the issue?" Brenda shot him a glare that told him to back off. Carlos, unnerved, slowly retreated, muttering, "We have bigger items in the overheads up front. No problem at all." Darius looked at Mark, then Brenda, feeling singled out, harassed. Is there a reason you're trying to remove my bag when it fits? Brenda's lips thinned. I'm going to have to insist. Either let us gate check it or deplane. Your call. I want your names, Darius demanded, voice trembling with anger. Both of you. This is harassment, plain and simple. Mark folded his arms. I don't care what you call it. We're following policy. Your own colleague just said there's no problem with my bag, Darius retorted. At that, Brenda's face flushed. She turned to Mark. Let's get security if he won't comply. Darius's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Security for a bag that fit in the bin. For a passenger who had been forcibly removed from business class for no logical reason. The hostility was unmistakable. The tension in the cabin soared. Other passengers began to protest on Darius's behalf. You can't do that, an older woman snapped. He's not breaking any rules. A man in a suit leaned over the aisle. This is outrageous. Let him be. Brenda's gaze flicked nervously around. Perhaps she realized the tide was turning. But Mark, clearly not wanting to back down, strode toward the front to call an authority figure. Within minutes, an airport security officer, Officer Davis, boarded the plane, imposing in his uniform and earpiece, scanning the row. When he reached Darius's seat, Davis's posture softened. What's going on here? Mark jumped in, pointing an accusatory finger at Darius. This passenger is being non-compliant with baggage rules and was previously causing a disturbance at the gate. Darius locked eyes with Officer Davis, speaking calmly. All I did was show my ticket for a business class seat I paid for. They forced me into economy, and now they're trying to remove me entirely, claiming my bag is too big when it clearly is not. Other passengers can confirm. Voices around him chimed in with murmurs of agreement. Officer Davis looked at the overhead bin, then at Mark and Brenda. That bag is standard size. I see no violation of rules. He paused, turning to them. Is there another issue I'm missing? Brenda hesitated, eyes darting to Mark for backup. Mark exhaled. We have the right to remove any passenger who disrupts the flight or disobeys crew instructions. This man was being belligerent at the gate. Darius started to defend himself, but Officer Davis raised a hand gently. Sir, let me ask, are you refusing any direct instruction that pertains to safety or airline policy? No, I'm not, Darius replied evenly. I've followed every request. I just want to sit in my seat and fly to New York. The security officer nodded slowly. He studied Mark's face, something about the agent's demeanor setting off alarm bells. After a moment, Davis sighed. Unless there's a real policy infraction or safety concern, I can't forcibly remove him. Mark's face turned red. Brenda's lips curled in frustration. They both realized the officer wasn't blindly supporting them. Seething, Mark snapped, Fine. Then we'll handle it ourselves through the airline's channels. Davis shrugged, turned to Darius and gave a polite nod. All right, sir. Have a safe flight. He walked off the plane. Darius Martin stepped onto the Boeing 737 with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Despite having purchased a business class ticket, he'd been coerced into switching to an economy seat by Mark, the hostile gate agent. Now he found himself heading toward the back of the plane, clutching his carry-on, an unassuming black duffel that had never caused problems on any flight before. A mixture of embarrassment and anger simmered inside him. He'd willingly flown in economy many times when it was his own choice, but being pushed out of business because of blatant discrimination felt like a gut punch. He reached row 28, checking the seat numbers before lowering himself into the narrow middle seat. A young woman wearing a college sweatshirt sat by the window, shooting him a polite smile as she tucked her laptop away. On his other side, an older gentleman with a silver beard and a worn wooden cane nodded in greeting. Both seemed friendly enough, which eased Darius's tension, if only slightly. He stowed his carry-on in the overhead bin, confirming that it fit neatly, then sank into his seat. exhaling a breath laced with frustration. For a few minutes, things seemed calm. Flight attendants bustled down the aisle, helping passengers find seats. Overhead compartments clicked shut, and the air conditioning hummed. Darius tried to distract himself by scrolling through emails on his phone, but just as he was beginning to settle, a familiar voice jerked him back to reality. "Excuse me, sir," came Mark's sharp tone, carrying through the din of the cabin. Darius glanced up to see Mark barreling down the aisle with another flight attendant in tow this time. A stern-faced woman with her brown hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name tag read Brenda Saunders. Mark stopped at Darius's row, arms crossed, as if preparing for battle. Brenda stood beside him, scanning Darius with eyes narrowed in suspicion. Darius's stomach clenched. "Can I help you?" he asked, forcing a polite tone despite his frustration. Brenda cleared her throat. "Sir, there's a problem with your carry-on bag," she announced, pointing at the closed overhead bin above Darius. "It's too large for the cabin and needs to be checked." Caught off guard, Darius frowned. "I've brought this same duffel on multiple flights with no issue. It fits perfectly. I placed it up there myself. It's not protruding. Is there some new policy I'm unaware of?" She pursed her lips, then made a dramatic show of tugging at the overhead bin latch, though it remained closed. "It's clearly not standard size," she insisted, voice rising. "We'll need to gate check it, or else you'll have to deplane." A rumble of whispers spread among nearby passengers. People craned their necks to see the commotion. Darius felt a hot flush in his cheeks. It was obvious that Brenda wasn't doing this for any real safety or size issue. She was reaching for an excuse to hassle him. His mind darted back to the humiliating fiasco at the gate when they'd insisted he didn't belong in business class. Now they were targeting his luggage? Before Darius could respond, a young flight attendant named Carlos, who'd been helping another family stow a stroller, stepped up. Confusion etched on his face. "Is there a problem here?" Carlos asked, glancing from Mark to Brenda. Brenda let out an irritated sigh. "Yes, there is. This gentleman's bag is too large for the overhead compartment." Carlos blinked in surprise, opened the bin, and peered at the duffel. "It looks fine," he said, pulling it out slightly to confirm its size. "I've seen bigger roller suitcases up front. This is under the limit." Brenda's cheeks darkened at being contradicted. She turned her glare on Carlos. "We have specific guidelines for carry-ons," she snapped, though her voice quavered. "I'm trying to follow policy." Darius's temper flared, but he fought to remain measured. "Do you have a tape measure? A sizer? I'm more than willing to let you check the bag's dimensions if you believe it's too big." Eyes flicked toward Mark, who'd stayed silent, his face flushed with tension. Carlos, evidently unnerved by Brenda's authority, took a step back, muttering, I didn't see any issue, but I'll let you two handle it." Seeing her colleague retreat, Brenda turned on Darius. "I'm going to insist we gate-check this bag. Either comply or deplane, Mr. Martin. It's your choice." That same wave of indignation swept over him again. "This feels like harassment." "You both know this bag fits your co-worker just confirmed it." He met their gazes, voice trembling with contained anger. "I'd like both of your names, please." A hush fell around them. Passengers on all sides were watching, some with phones poised to record. Darius noticed the young woman in the sweatshirt had paused her music, staring open-mouthed. The older man with the cane shook his head in disapproval. Someone a row behind them whispered, "Unbelievable." Mark folded his arms, glowering. "Name's Mark, and this is Brenda. Doesn't matter, because we're following airline rules." "You're not following airline rules," Darius countered in a steady tone. "You're singling me out for reasons that have nothing to do with policy." Another flight attendant just confirmed the bag is within limits. Brenda's face reddened. She looked around, noticing multiple passengers filming. Maybe she realized how this would appear if it went viral, but she refused to back down. "Mark," she said, turning to him with forced confidence, "we need to escalate this. Let's get airport security. If he won't check the bag, he's defying crew instructions." Anxious murmurs swept the cabin. The environment crackled with tension so palpable that even passengers who'd tried to ignore the scene were now transfixed. Darius's heart thundered in his chest. Security over a bag that fit just fine. On top of that, he'd already been denied his rightful seat. It was becoming painfully clear this was about something more insidious than a luggage policy. A tall man in a business suit across the aisle spoke up. "This is outrageous. Let him keep his bag." His calm voice carried authority, and a few others echoed agreement. At that, Mark grimaced, realizing he couldn't simply bully the entire cabin into silence. He stalked down the aisle toward the flight deck, presumably to call for backup. Within minutes, an airport security officer arrived, a broad-shouldered man named Officer Davis, wearing a dark blue uniform and an earpiece. As he stepped into the plane, an uneasy hush fell over the passengers. "What's the issue here?" Officer Davis asked, scanning the faces around him. Mark spoke first, jabbing a finger at Darius. "This passenger is refusing to comply with the crew regarding his oversized bag. He also caused a disturbance at the gate." Darius kept his composure, meeting the officer's gaze steadily. "My bag is not oversized," he said. "The overhead bin closes without trouble. We have a flight attendant who verified it's within the limit. And as for any disturbance at the gate, all I did was show a business class ticket, one I paid for, but they downgraded me. Now they're trying to remove me from the plane for refusing to check a normal bag." Voices rose in agreement from the rows around him. Several passengers chimed in. "He's telling the truth. They're harassing him. We all saw it. It's not too big." Officer Davis examined the bag, opening the overhead compartment. He looked briefly confused, then turned a measured gaze on Mark and Brenda. "This is clearly a standard-size carry-on," he said. "I see no violation of the rules." Brenda's posture stiffened. Mark's lips compressed into a thin line. Officer Davis continued, "Unless he's breaking a safety regulation or actively refusing a lawful instruction, I can't forcibly remove him. Is there some other issue I'm unaware of?" Brenda's expression flickered with uncertainty. Mark forced a scowl. He was belligerent at the gate, he insisted, though his voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. Officer Davis turned to Darius. "Sir, are you refusing any safety instructions?" Darius shook his head. "Not at all. I'm cooperating fully. I'm just trying to get to New York. I don't understand why they keep targeting me." A quiet moment passed as Officer Davis took in the atmosphere, the suspicious stares from Mark and Brenda, the supportive murmurs from fellow passengers, the duffel bag that clearly fit. Finally, he nodded at Darius. "All right, sir. You have a safe flight." Then he looked at the flight attendants. "If there's no legitimate safety or policy breach, let's proceed without further disruption." With that, Officer Davis turned on his heel and left the plane, leaving Mark and Brenda seething. They watched him go, their expressions a storm of frustration and residual anger. The seatbelt sign chimed, indicating final preparations for departure. Yet, Mark wasn't done. He strode back to the cockpit, and within seconds the pilot made an announcement that there would be a brief delay. Brenda and Mark disappeared behind the galley curtain. Moments later, a flight supervisor stepped on board, summoning Darius by name and demanding he gather his belongings. Their justification was a vague claim about threatening behavior, a term that immediately put the entire cabin on edge. Protests erupted among passengers. Cameras recorded. Darius felt the final blow of humiliation as he stepped into the aisle, forced to deplane under false pretenses. He swallowed his fury, determined that this injustice would not be the end of the story. And in truth, it was only the beginning. Every fiber of Darius's being roiled with indignation. The question was how to reveal who he was and effect real change, not only for himself, but for the countless others who would otherwise have no recourse. Part of him wanted to burst back onto the plane and shout the truth. I own this airline. But calmer instincts prevailed. He needed a plan. This wasn't just about his seat or even one flight. It was about an entire company's culture. He reached for his phone and made a call to Denise Russell, his right-hand woman in the corporate office. Denise was an old friend from business school, a brilliant legal mind who had helped him broker the deal to buy controlling shares in the airline. Her voice crackled over the line. "Darius? Did you land already?" he exhaled, explaining the fiasco that had just unfolded. Denise's shock was palpable through the phone. "They removed you from the plane? That's outrageous. Did you tell them who you are?" "Not yet," he admitted, voice trembling with pent-up anger. "But it's time. Call an emergency meeting with the executive board. I want the entire leadership team on the line. And get our PR folks ready. This is about to go public." Denise understood the gravity of his tone. "I'm on it. You want me to call the CEO, or do you want to do that yourself?" "I'll handle it," he replied, referencing the airline's longtime CEO, Raymond Harlan, who had stayed on after Darius acquired majority shares. Despite Darius's official authority, Raymond was the face and name known to the public. "Let's set up a video conference in an hour. I'll find a quiet spot in the terminal." They hung up, and Darius immediately dialed Raymond. When the older man's voice came on, warm and affable, Darius went straight to the point. "There's a crisis you need to know about," he said. "Your staff has just racially profiled and removed me, your majority owner, from a flight." Raymond inhaled sharply. "They, what? Good God, Darius. Are you safe?" "Yes," Darius said, his tone clipped. "But I'm furious. We have a major problem on our hands. We need a meeting with the rest of the board to decide how to handle this." Raymond fell silent for a moment, then agreed. "Absolutely. I'll gather them right away." Darius found an unoccupied gate area, sat down, and tried to calm himself. He typed out a thorough, bullet-pointed summary of the incident to share. Then, promptly at the appointed time, he joined a secure video conference. Faces popped onto the screen: Raymond, Denise, the CFO, the head of HR, the head of legal, a few others. They all looked tense. Darius recounted every detail, from Leslie at check-in to Mark at the gate to Brenda's confrontation on the plane, culminating in Karen forcibly removing him. As he spoke, some on the call seemed astonished. Others looked fearful of the repercussions. The CFO, Charles Tan, asked, "Were there witnesses or any video evidence?" Dozens of passengers saw it. Some were recording. "I have their contact information if we need statements." "And let's not forget the security officer who boarded the plane, Officer Davis," he concluded. "I wasn't breaking any rules." Raymond pressed a hand to his temple. "This is a nightmare." The head of HR, Jennifer Liu, carefully said, "We'll have to launch a formal investigation. We can't just terminate employees without due process. But this is serious enough that Mark, Brenda, and Karen may face immediate suspension." "Suspension is the least of our concerns," Darius snapped, swallowing the anger in his throat. "We're dealing with blatant racism, not just a minor policy slip. They targeted me, called security, forcibly removed me, all because they assumed I didn't belong in business class. I'm certain there's more to it, the check-in fiasco, the seat glitch. It might be some deeper issue in the system. But the way they treated me indicates a toxic culture." Denise nodded fervently. "We also need a PR strategy. If passengers post those videos, it'll go viral. A black man dragged off a plane for no reason. That alone is devastating. But once the public learns he's the majority owner, the outrage will be astronomical." Raymond grimaced. "Yes, it will. We need to get ahead of this, offer a sincere apology, and show immediate corrective action." He paused, meeting Darius's gaze through the screen. "What do you want to do?" A hush fell across the digital meeting. Darius took a moment to steady himself, replaying the humiliation in his mind, the looks, the sneers, the subtle remarks. Finally he spoke, each word deliberate. "I want to hold these individuals accountable, but not just them. This reveals a deeper problem: lack of diversity training, absence of strong policies preventing racial profiling. We have an opportunity to do something bigger here, transform the airline's culture from top to bottom." He saw heads nodding. Jennifer Liu typed notes rapidly. Charles Tan frowned in concentration, clearly calculating the financial repercussions. Darius continued, "Effective immediately. I want these employees suspended. I want an internal review of every incident involving alleged discrimination in the last 3 years. I want mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training rolled out to all staff. And we need a public statement acknowledging what happened, no sugarcoating, no spin. An apology that addresses the issue head-on with a clear plan of action." Raymond, looking genuinely contrite, nodded. "Agreed. We'll also offer compensation or apology letters to any passengers who were inconvenienced by this fiasco. In addition, I'll ensure we accelerate the integration of a new digital seat assignment system to prevent gate agents from messing with legitimate bookings." Darius exhaled, feeling a measure of relief. He'd purchased this airline to rescue it from bankruptcy, but now he realized it needed salvation from a deeper, more pervasive rot. He stared into the camera, voice resolute. "I'll release a personal statement too. I'm going to be honest about my position as majority owner and how I was treated. This is bigger than me. It's about every person who's ever been humiliated by discrimination. Let's do the right thing." With the plan settled, the meeting ended. While some aspects still felt uncertain how the public would react, how wide the scandal would spread, Darius felt a sense of purpose. For once, he would stand openly against such injustice, rather than quietly observe and fix problems behind the scenes. Once the official statement went out, signed by Darius Martin, majority owner, and endorsed by CEO Raymond Harlan, the news spread like wildfire. Major outlets picked up the story. Social media exploded. Hashtags about airline discrimination, about the horrifying irony of a black owner being kicked off his own plane, trended on Twitter. Viral videos showed Mark scolding Darius, Brenda trying to force him to check a perfectly normal carry-on, and Karen instructing him to leave the plane. In each frame, Darius maintained a remarkable composure, while the staff's hostility crackled. People around the world were incensed. Activists demanded the airline do more than apologize. They wanted a thorough purge of racist employees, a legal reckoning, lawsuits. Long-time customers threatened to boycott until they saw tangible changes. Some business commentators pointed out that Darius Martin had the unique power to enact real consequences from within, setting a new precedent for how corporations should handle bigotry. Darius's phone didn't stop buzzing. Friends called to express shock and outrage. Journalists requested interviews. Activist groups invited him to speak at rallies. Even a few of his old college professors reached out, proud that he was using his position to combat racism. Amid this storm, the airline's shares wobbled momentarily, but ironically, they rebounded as investors realized the swift response might actually bolster the airline's long-term reputation if handled ethically. The board stood behind Darius's plan, albeit with some trepidation about the financial costs. Lawsuits were filed by certain passengers who witnessed the incident, claiming emotional distress. The airline braced for legal battles. Darius spent the next few days immersed in damage control, press conferences, and high-level decisions about staff discipline. Mark, Brenda, Karen, and Leslie from check-in were suspended pending a full investigation. Rumors circulated that they might be terminated. Each insisted they weren't racist, that they were following protocol, but the videos told a different story, one of microaggressions snowballing into outright hostility. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Darius quietly arranged for flight upgrades, refunds, and personal apologies to everyone who had been on that plane. He also reached out to Officer Davis, the security guard, thanking him for remaining neutral and objective. Davis was stunned to learn that the man he'd tried to protect was the airline's owner, but he was glad he had done the right thing. Through it all, Darius grappled with a complex mix of emotions: anger that he had endured such treatment, determination to use his influence for justice, and a strange gratitude that his personal experience could illuminate a broader systemic failure. He realized his mother's birthday trip had turned into something monumental, an inflection point for the entire airline industry, to see how racism could be confronted, not just with words, but with tangible reforms. After an internal investigation that involved passenger interviews, staff statements, and a deep audit of the airline's digital records, the conclusions were damning. Evidence showed that Mark had manually overridden Darius's seat assignment in the computer system after seeing him at the gate. The record indicated a suspicious passenger-flagged note, though no actual reason or documentation supported it. Brenda had repeatedly singled out certain passengers of color for baggage or seating infractions. In the past, customer complaints had been lodged, but never followed up. Leslie was known for her dismissive attitude toward minority travelers at check-in. Karen, the flight supervisor, had a lower incidence of reported misconduct, but testimonies revealed she sided quickly with Mark's false narrative about Darius's aggressive behavior without investigation. Jennifer Liu, the head of HR, compiled all this into a detailed report. When the board reconvened, the decision was unanimous. Mark, Brenda, and Karen would be terminated for cause falsification of records, discriminatory behavior, and abuse of authority. Leslie would also be terminated for repeated complaints regarding her condescending attitude toward black passengers. When Darius read the final statement, he felt a wave of relief mixed with the heaviness of responsibility. He knew this was just the beginning. Changing a culture went beyond firing a few bad actors. But it was a start. Thousands of employees watched closely, some fearful, some grateful for the clarity. Despite their firings, Mark, Brenda, Karen, and Leslie initially refused to go quietly. They threatened legal action, they demanded severance, they cried foul in local media, painting themselves as scapegoats. Mark insisted he had done nothing wrong, repeating that he felt threatened. But the avalanche of video evidence was insurmountable. Public sentiment turned against them swiftly. In a desperate bid to salvage their reputations, they requested a meeting with Darius off the record. They insisted they wanted to apologize. He wasn't sure if they were sincere or merely hoping to reduce consequences. Eventually, he agreed to a private meeting at the airline's corporate headquarters, accompanied by Denise and a representative from HR to ensure everything remained professional. They gathered in a small conference room. Mark sat with his arms folded, eyes blazing, while Brenda looked chastened but still defiant. Karen fidgeted with her handbag, and Leslie stared at the table, face pale. Darius entered calmly, wearing a simple suit, his expression neutral. Denise and Jennifer Liu stood behind him. Karen spoke first, voice trembling. "I want to say I'm sorry for how the situation escalated. I should have listened to the passengers who said you weren't causing trouble. But I had to trust my gate agent's word. I regret that now." Leslie swallowed. The system flagged you, so I assumed something was off. It's how we're trained to be cautious. It wasn't personal. Darius glanced at her. But you told me to move aside without even looking at my confirmation email. You refused to help, refused to even consider the possibility that your system was wrong. You realize how that appears, correct? She lowered her gaze again, voice weak. Yes, I do. Brenda tried a different tack. We're not racist. I mean, some of my closest friends are black, she blurted, tears welling in her eyes. I just thought you were being difficult. We get so many troublemakers who try to stuff oversized bags or get free upgrades. I didn't realize you truly had that seat. Darius wanted to roll his eyes at the tired refrain, some of my closest friends are black. He stifled the impulse, took a measured breath. People do try to bend rules. I understand that. But what I experienced was far beyond normal policy enforcement. Your tone, your refusal to check the actual facts, your threat to involve security. It was personal. Whether you consciously realized it or not, your bias drove you to assume I was in the wrong. Mark, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. Look, I've worked gates for years. I know the type of passenger who tries to pull a fast one. You fit the profile. Darius's eyebrows shot up. Profile? What profile is that exactly? Mark shrugged sullenly. Young, flashy, probably doesn't belong in business class. Those are the ones who cause trouble. A bitter laugh escaped Darius's mouth. Do you realize how that sounds? Because I'm a black man in casual clothes, you assumed I didn't belong. That's pure prejudice, Mark. Silence draped the room. Thick and suffocating, Mark's cheeks flamed. He tried to speak, then shut his mouth. Darius took a moment to gather himself, feeling the swirl of anger and frustration. This is precisely what we're trying to change. Whether you intended to be hateful or not, your biases created a humiliating and unjust experience. I've had messages from other passengers who faced the same treatment. How many times have people been harassed or removed unjustly without the power or visibility to fight back? None of them could meet his eyes. Brenda sniveled into a tissue. Karen looked guilt-ridden. Leslie twisted her hands. Darius continued, voice firm but not unkind. I accept your apologies, and I truly hope you learn from this. But understand that the consequences stand. Our airline cannot employ individuals who treat customers this way. The damage you caused is immense, both to me personally and to our brand. More importantly, it perpetuates harm to every future passenger who doesn't fit the profile. The 4 former employees had little to say in response. They muttered half-formed regrets, asked for second chances that Darius could not grant. By the end, they stood to leave, heads bowed. Brenda and Leslie each tried once more for leniency, but Jennifer Liu politely shut them down. The decision is final. As they shuffled out, Mark paused at the door, turned back and mumbled, I guess this is karma, huh? Darius regarded him steadily. In a sense, yes, but it could also be a turning point for you if you let it. Mark's throat bobbed, and for an instant, real vulnerability flickered in his eyes. Then he nodded curtly and stepped out. With the crisis slowly abating, Darius returned his focus to rebuilding the airline's reputation and morale. He traveled to various bases, meeting staff members, listening to their concerns. Many were appalled by what had happened, deeply upset that their colleagues had treated any customer that way. Some employees, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, confessed they felt uneasy at work, worried about microaggressions from certain co-workers or how complaints might be ignored. Darius instituted a brand new department, Equality and Inclusion Office, staffed by professionals trained in conflict resolution, bias mitigation, and employee advocacy. He also gave HR more power to investigate complaints thoroughly, bypassing direct supervisors if needed. Quarterly reports would track improvements in service quality, focusing on fairness and respect for all passengers. Within weeks, the airline released heartfelt commercials featuring employees of diverse backgrounds expressing their commitment to creating a welcoming environment. They used real brand associations partnerships with Boeing for advanced, comfortable planes to highlight a forward-thinking vision for aviation. Customer feedback improved. Some news outlets praised the airline for turning a scandal into an opportunity for meaningful change. Throughout this process, Darius received thousands of supportive messages from strangers across the globe. Others shared their stories of discrimination. He felt both honored and overwhelmed, determined to do more. He set up a charitable foundation under his personal name, allocating a percentage of the airline's profits to scholarships for underprivileged youth, pursuing careers in aviation, engineering, and technology. On a personal level, Darius also reflected on his mother's birthday, how he'd missed the flight and the family gathering he had intended to attend. When he eventually took a different flight to see her, he arrived with a heavy heart, but the wide embrace his mother gave him banished all sadness for a moment. After hearing his ordeal, she cried, outraged, then proud that her son had used the experience to champion justice. Months later, as the airline's transformation continued, Darius returned to the newly renovated lounge at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Gone were the days of shabby check-in counters and outdated signage. Now, the airline's brand boasted bright, modern decor and bold slogans about inclusivity. He was en route to a business conference, traveling once again in secret, though this time the entire staff had been extensively trained and no one was likely to hassle him. He approached the check-in kiosk, typed in his details, and the system processed smoothly, printing out a business-class boarding pass without a hitch. While waiting to board, Darius overheard a conversation nearby. A passenger, an elderly black woman in elegant attire, was speaking to a gate agent, who apologized profusely for a small glitch in the system. The agent was respectful, quick to fix the issue, and even offered a complimentary upgrade for the inconvenience. The passenger beamed. A subtle smile touched Darius's lips. It was a small incident, but it symbolized the shift he'd hoped to see, staff members going out of their way to ensure fairness and kindness. This was only the start, and the work was never over, but small victories like these gave him faith. As he boarded, no one questioned his seat assignment. A flight attendant warmly welcomed him, escorted him to his seat, and offered to hang his jacket. He sat down, exhaling contentedly, feeling a sense of closure. The flight took off without incident, gliding through the skies toward the next destination, a future of renewed hope for the airline and its passengers. In the end, the airline's leadership, together with Darius, learned a crucial lesson. Genuine transformation only happens when those in power confront injustice openly, refusing to hide behind excuses or half measures. By embracing accountability, they lit the path toward real equity for both employees and travelers. Hard karma had struck, but through humility, reflection, and courageous action, they turned that moment of reckoning into a promise of better days. Thank you for witnessing this powerful story of prejudice, perseverance, and the triumph of doing what's right. Darius Martin could have walked away quietly, but he chose to confront the very system he had the power to change. His journey reminds us that justice isn't just a lofty idea, it takes courage, action, and leadership, especially when the stakes are high. From the humiliation he faced, to the swift reckoning that followed, and ultimately the airline's transformation, we see how hard karma can pave the way for real progress. No matter the obstacles, no matter how difficult the conversation, standing up against discrimination creates the possibility of a better world. If this story resonated with you, please remember to like this video, share it with others who need inspiration, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that illuminate the power of courage and empathy. Thank you for watching and for believing in positive change.